Imagine you're just a regular kid, trying to make your way home when you're stopped by someone in authority. What if, in a single moment, everything about you is questioned, not because of your actions, but because of how the world sees you? The sun is setting over a quiet suburban neighborhood, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns. The camera pans over rows of houses, the calm broken only by the soft hum of streetlights flickering to life. In the distance, a dog barks faintly, and the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze fills the air. The tranquility of the evening seems almost too perfect, too still. But as the scene unfolds, that peace is about to be shattered by an unexpected and tense encounter. Lucas, an 11-year-old black boy, walks down the sidewalk making his way home from a friend's house. His backpack is slung carelessly over one shoulder, his feet moving at a leisurely pace. Dressed in a simple gray hoodie, dark shorts, and white sneakers, he seems just like any other kid. His casual stroll a reflection of his comfort in the neighborhood he calls home. The street is quiet, empty, save for the faint echo of his footsteps against the pavement. The neighborhood, though peaceful on the surface, holds an undercurrent of tension that Lucas is oblivious to. The calmness of the evening, however, does nothing to foreshadow the storm that's about to break. As Lucas walks, his eyes occasionally flicker to the houses around him, noticing the familiar faces of neighbors through their windows as they wind down from their busy days. It's a routine walk, one he's taken countless times. He knows these streets. He knows the faces of the people who live here. Or so he thinks. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the sun's golden hue starts to fade, bringing a slight chill to the evening air. With every step, the world seems to slow down, as if the calm before the storm is hanging heavy in the air. It's then that Lucas hears the faint sound of an approaching vehicle. He doesn't think much of it at first, as cars are a regular part of suburban life. But as the vehicle draws nearer, a sense of unease begins to creep over him, though he can't quite place why. The car slows down as it nears him, and Lucas turns his head slightly, his eyes meeting the tinted window of the police cruiser. Officer Matthews, a man in his 40s, sits in the driver's seat, his eyes scanning the street. He slows even further, the engine idling in the quiet evening air. His gaze locks with Lucas's, and for a moment, time seems to stand still. Lucas, still unaware of the tension beginning to form, stops walking, his eyes narrowing slightly, instinctively sensing that something is wrong. Officer Matthews's eyes narrow, his posture rigid. He's a man used to asserting authority, his experience in the force having taught him to maintain control of any situation. But as he looks at the young boy, a flicker of uncertainty crosses his face. Lucas, without saying a word, stands frozen in place, caught between continuing his walk home or turning back. The weight of the officer's gaze feels like an invisible pressure in the air. "Hey, you!" Officer Matthews calls out from his car, his voice sharp, though not yet accusatory. "Where are you headed?" Lucas hesitates for a moment before answering, his voice steady but unsure. "Just heading home from a friend's house." There's a brief silence, broken only by the low rumble of the car's engine. Officer Matthews takes a moment to assess the boy, and in that moment, a flash of doubt crosses his mind. There's nothing inherently suspicious about Lucas. He's just a kid. But something in his gut tells him to ask more questions. "Out here by yourself?" Matthews continues, his voice firm, though still not hostile. He looks Lucas up and down, his eyes lingering just a bit too long. Something about the boy's appearance triggers a response in Matthews, one he can't quite shake off. He's seen kids like Lucas before, kids who didn't belong in certain parts of town. The subtle judgment, the assumptions made based on skin color and appearance, begins to cloud his better judgment. Lucas's heartbeat quickens, a slight tightening in his chest. He can feel the officer's eyes boring into him, and though he's used to the occasional glance of suspicion from people in the neighborhood, this feels different. There's something about the officer's presence that makes him uneasy. He tries to steady his voice as he responds. "Yeah, I live around here, just walking home." Officer Matthews' gaze doesn't break from Lucas's face, and his posture stiffens ever so slightly. There's an almost imperceptible hesitation in the air before he speaks again, his tone growing more pointed. "Come here," Matthews orders, his voice now taking on a more authoritative edge. Lucas stands frozen for a moment. His feet feel heavy, as though something deep within him is telling him to run, to get away from this situation before it escalates. But something also tells him to stay put, to face whatever might come next. As the officer exits the vehicle, the tension between them thickens. The once peaceful suburban street now feels charged with uncertainty, the hum of streetlights and the faint chirping of crickets swallowed up by the weight of this one interaction. Officer Matthews's gaze doesn't leave Lucas as he approaches, his every step measured and deliberate. And in that moment, Lucas feels a knot form in his stomach, a knot he can't untangle, no matter how hard he tries. The quiet neighborhood is no longer just a place of comfort. It has become the stage for something much larger, something that will soon change Lucas's life forever. Lucas is an 11-year-old boy who, on the surface, seems like any other child growing up in the suburbs. His life has been shaped by a blend of privilege and challenge. Raised by his father, a high-ranking CIA agent, and his mother, a dedicated teacher, Lucas has been exposed to a world where discipline, intelligence, and fairness are valued above all else. His family's values are clear: work hard, stay calm in difficult situations, and fight for justice, no matter what the world may throw at you. Though Lucas's neighborhood is predominantly white, he's grown accustomed to the occasional sting of prejudice, the subtle, silent judgments made when he steps outside of his home. The microaggressions, small, dismissive gestures that never quite seem to leave him, are just part of the landscape of his life. His father, despite his high status in the CIA, never shielded him from the reality of racial biases, instead teaching Lucas how to handle them. From a young age, Lucas was told that his actions would speak louder than anything the world might say about him. He was always told to be calm, poised, and intelligent, values he clung to as he navigated the complexities of growing up black in a place where he was often an outsider. On this particular evening, Lucas is walking home from his friend's house, unaware that this routine journey will become the moment that changes everything. His hoodie, dark shorts, and white sneakers make him seem like any other kid, lost in his thoughts as he walks along the tree-lined streets. The neighborhood, which has always felt calm, suddenly takes on a different tone in the fading light. The soft hum of street lights and the smell of the distant dinner being cooked in nearby homes offer a sense of peace. Yet, Lucas doesn't know that his night is about to shift. The weight of the neighborhood's assumptions is waiting just around the corner. Officer Matthews, in his early 40s, has spent the past 15 years patrolling the streets of this suburban area. The job has aged him, leaving his face hardened by the years of tension between his badge and his personal life. Matthews grew up in a small, predominantly white town where he never had to question the way things worked. He learned from an early age to trust his instincts, and those instincts often leaned toward suspicion of people who looked like Lucas. Raised in an environment where people of color were seen as outsiders, Matthews carries with him the biases instilled in him from childhood. His career in law enforcement has only deepened these views. Despite his desire to be fair and serve the public, Matthews often finds himself profiling, using race as an unconscious shortcut to gauge potential threats. As much as he wants to do the right thing, he's too ingrained in his ways to see the full picture. The night is particularly taxing for Matthews. He's tired, his shift dragging on with little excitement or purpose. The work has grown tedious, and his mind has become clouded by the frustrations of the day. His thoughts are far from clear when he spots Lucas walking alone on the sidewalk. Matthews slows his patrol car, his eyes narrowing. Without hesitation, he makes an immediate assumption. Lucas, a young black boy, doesn't belong in this mostly white neighborhood. He doesn't fit the picture of a good kid out for a walk at this hour. Matthews's first instinct is to stop him. He doesn't know why exactly. Perhaps it's the dark hoodie, the solitude, or just the gut feeling that Lucas doesn't belong here. But whatever it is, Matthews decides that he's going to question the boy. In Matthews' mind, the idea of a child like Lucas walking in a neighborhood like this doesn't quite add up. He's seen people of color in his line of work, always assuming the worst, always questioning their purpose in spaces that Matthews believes they shouldn't be in. He doesn't know anything about Lucas's background or his family, but it doesn't matter. The officer is operating on years of ingrained assumptions, instincts that have been honed by exposure to the racial dynamics of his community. As the officer pulls closer to Lucas, his grip tightens on the steering wheel. He checks his rearview mirror before rolling down the window, preparing to assert his authority. The moment feels like it's building into something inevitable. Matthews's body language shifts into a stance of dominance. There's an unspoken tension in the air as he pulls up next to Lucas. Lucas, who has been walking with his head down, senses the change in the air. He hears the engine of the patrol car, and before he can fully register why, he looks up to see the officer slowly bringing the vehicle to a stop. Lucas's heart beats faster. He doesn't know why he feels this way, but he has learned from an early age that being a black boy in the wrong neighborhood can often bring trouble. His grip tightens on the strap of his backpack, instinctively trying to steady his nerves. Matthews doesn't wait long before rolling down the window and addressing the boy. His tone is stern, carrying the weight of authority that Lucas has grown so accustomed to feeling. "Where are you headed?" Matthews asks, his eyes scanning Lucas's face for any sign of trouble. Lucas freezes, his thoughts racing. He knows the answer he should give, the one that will let him go on his way. But his mind is clouded with doubt. He simply says, "I'm just walking home." Matthew's expression hardens as he watches Lucas. The officer leans forward, his hands on the wheel, trying to determine if the boy's story checks out. He's already made a decision about Lucas's presence in this neighborhood. And in Matthew's mind, Lucas is not the kind of kid who should be out here at this hour. "Where do you live?" Matthews asks again, his tone now edged with suspicion. Lucas hesitates, his chest tightening. The officer's gaze is intense, almost intimidating. For a moment, Lucas wonders if he's made a mistake by walking here, if he's somehow misstepped in a world that doesn't see him as just another kid. "I live on Oak Avenue," Lucas finally answers. But the doubt hangs heavy in the air. Matthews nods, but there's a flicker in his eyes that suggests something else is brewing beneath the surface. He hasn't made up his mind completely, but it's clear that Lucas's answers, and the simple fact of him being there, are being measured against a set of preconceived notions. In the silence that stretches between them, Lucas begins to feel the weight of the officer's gaze, as though he's being sized up, as if his presence alone has already become an issue. He doesn't know what to do or say next. He just wants to be seen as a normal kid on his way home. Matthews watches him for a moment longer before deciding that Lucas hasn't given him enough of an answer, though he knows nothing about the boy's life or what brought him to this neighborhood. His actions are guided by the stories Matthews has internalized over the years, the stories that have framed how he views the world. In this moment, Matthews is not seeing a young boy, a neighbor, or a child. He's seeing something else. As Lucas stands there on the sidewalk, the tension between him and Officer Matthews grows thick, almost palpable. The neighborhood around them, so quiet moments ago, now feels suffocating. The hum of distant traffic and the rustling of leaves seem to fade, replaced by the sound of Matthew's voice, which is sharp, demanding, and accusatory. "What are you doing here?" Matthews asks, his words coming fast and heavy. "Where are your parents? Why are you out here alone?" Lucas feels the heat of the officer's stare bore into him, but he holds his ground, his gaze steady and unflinching. He knows the drill. Stay calm, stay composed. His father's lessons echo in his mind. When confronted by authority, don't show fear. But the words from the officer don't sit well with him. There's something in Matthews's tone, something that feels unjust. "I'm just walking home," Lucas replies, his voice quiet but clear. He tries to keep his words simple, his explanation straightforward. But the officer's eyes narrow as he scans Lucas's face. Matthews steps closer, towering over the boy, his uniform stiff and imposing. "Where's home? And why are you here, of all places?" he demands. The question feels loaded, accusatory, as if the officer is already assuming Lucas has no business being in this neighborhood. His eyes flicker over Lucas, sizing him up, making judgments based on nothing but his appearance. His mind is already set. Lucas doesn't belong here. Lucas feels a tightness in his chest. His thoughts race. Why does it feel like Matthews is questioning his right to walk through the neighborhood? His father worked hard to get them here, to provide for their family, and now it feels like he's being seen as an outsider. But he can't let himself be rattled. He knows what he needs to do. With a steady breath, Lucas looks up at Matthews. "My dad's a CIA agent," he says firmly. It's a fact, one that should at least warrant a pause from the officer, a moment of reconsideration. After all, Lucas's family isn't just any family. His father's position, the respect that comes with it, should count for something. But to Officer Matthews, it's not enough. Matthews scoffs, the skepticism written all over his face. He steps back, shaking his head, clearly not believing Lucas's claim. "Yeah, right," Matthews mutters, brushing it off as if the idea of a black boy being the son of a CIA agent is some far-fetched story. He steps even closer now, his posture growing more aggressive. "You think that's going to get you out of this? I'm not buying it." The words hit Lucas like a slap in the face. He hadn't expected the officer to believe him right away, but he hadn't expected this level of dismissal either. Matthews's tone is laced with mockery, as if Lucas's statement doesn't hold any weight, as if Lucas himself, in this moment, doesn't matter. The officer's dismissive attitude stings, but Lucas refuses to let it show. "My dad's a CIA agent," Lucas repeats, his voice unwavering. His hands are tucked into his hoodie pocket, but his posture is straight. He won't back down, not now. His father's job isn't some shield to hide behind. It's the truth. But Matthews is relentless, pressing even harder now. "Where's your mom?" he asks, eyes flickering from Lucas's face to the empty street behind him. He seems almost as if he's trying to find any excuse to escalate this, to make something out of nothing. What kind of kid walks around here alone at night? Lucas holds firm, repeating his earlier response, "I'm just walking home." The silence that follows feels deafening. Matthews stares at Lucas, his mind still spinning with the assumptions that cloud his judgment. Despite Lucas's composed demeanor, Matthews's own frustration grows. His bias, shaped by years of experience, and reinforced by the systems that have always told him to be suspicious of kids like Lucas, has now taken over. Matthews's mind is made up. To him, Lucas isn't a kid in need of help. He's a problem that needs solving. Lucas's heart is pounding in his chest, but he doesn't let it show. He's been through this before, in different forms, different settings. He's been stared down, whispered about, and treated as though he doesn't belong. But tonight, with the officer's increasingly hostile tone, he knows something has to change. He knows this moment will define who he is, not just to Officer Matthews, but to himself. As Matthews's tone becomes more biting, Lucas finds his voice. He doesn't just want to be seen as another child being harassed. He wants to make it clear that he's not afraid of this officer, or anyone else who thinks they can define who he is. "I'm just walking home," Lucas says again, this time louder, his eyes meeting Matthews with a quiet resolve. Matthews, still unwilling to let go of his assumptions, continues his interrogation, pushing Lucas to reveal more. But Lucas knows there's no satisfying this officer. No matter what he says, Matthews will never see him as just a child walking home. To him, Lucas will always be something more, a threat, a problem to be solved. As the officer continues to press, Lucas begins to feel the weight of the situation in a new way. The system of racial profiling isn't just something he's read about. It's a reality he's living. The truth hits him like a cold gust of wind. He's not just fighting for respect, he's fighting for the right to exist without judgment. Lucas's voice trembles, but he doesn't back down. "My dad's a CIA agent," he says once more, this time with even more conviction, the words carrying the strength of his family's history and the pride of his identity. The tension lingers in the air, thick and uncomfortable, as Matthews stares at him. But Lucas doesn't look away. He stands tall, refusing to let the officer's bias define him. Can you relate to Lucas here? What would you do if you were in his shoes? Drop a comment below, and let's discuss the harsh realities of racial profiling in our society. This question encourages viewers to reflect on their own experiences with authority, bias, and the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. Officer Matthews walks away from Lucas, the boy's steady gaze still burned into his memory. His steps are heavy, his thoughts clouded with disbelief. The nagging question continues to circle in his mind. What if the kid was telling the truth? But Matthews pushes it aside. He's seen this before. Kids making up stories, trying to get out of trouble. He's dealt with enough to know that there's always a reason, always an excuse. Determined to prove Lucas wrong, Matthews decides to pay a visit to the boy's home. He's been on the job long enough to know where people like Lucas live. He doesn't think it's going to take long to find out if this CIA agent father actually exists. He mutters to himself as he walks down the street toward the address Lucas mentioned, his frustration growing with each step. The neighborhood is quiet. the same as when he first approached Lucas. But now, there's a feeling of tension in the air, the calm before a storm that Matthews has no idea is coming. He reaches the house, a modest, well-kept home, not what he expected. There's no grandiose gate, no luxury cars parked outside. Just a family home, the kind that anyone could live in. As he stands at the door, he doesn't realize that he's about to be confronted with the truth he's so desperately trying to ignore. He knocks once, then again, a little harder this time. There's a moment of silence before the door opens, and there he is, Lucas's father. The man before Matthews is tall, composed, his presence commanding without being threatening. He's dressed in a suit, not too flashy, but unmistakably professional. His face is calm, yet there's an air of authority about him that Matthews can't ignore. And then it hits him. Lucas's father is who he said he was, a high-ranking CIA agent. The moment stretches, thick with the realization of Matthews's mistake. "Can I help you?" Lucas's father asks, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of curiosity. Matthews stands there for a beat, uncertain how to proceed. He can't just walk away now. He's come this far, and there's a part of him that wants to prove the boy was lying. So he clears his throat, trying to steady his nerves, but the words come out with more hesitation than he expects. Your son said you were a CIA agent," Matthews says, his voice tinged with doubt, as if still trying to convince himself that Lucas must have made it all up. "I just wanted to verify that." Lucas's father steps aside, inviting Matthews in, his calmness only making Matthews feel more out of place. To him, Lucas isn't a kid in need of help. He's a problem that needs solving. Lucas's heart is pounding in his chest, but he doesn't let it show. He's been through this before, in different forms, different settings. He's been stared down, whispered about, and treated as though he doesn't belong. But tonight, with the officer's increasingly hostile tone, he knows something has to change. He knows this moment will define who he is, not just to Officer Matthews, but to himself. As Matthews's tone becomes more biting, Lucas finds his voice. He doesn't just want to be seen as another child being harassed. He wants to make it clear that he's not afraid of this officer, or anyone else who thinks they can define who he is. "I'm just walking home," Lucas says again, this time louder, his eyes meeting Matthews with a quiet resolve. Matthews, still unwilling to let go of his assumptions, continues his interrogation, pushing Lucas to reveal more. But Lucas knows there's no satisfying this officer. No matter what he says, Matthews will never see him as just a child walking home. To him, Lucas will always be something more, a threat, a problem to be solved. As the officer continues to press, Lucas begins to feel the weight of the situation in a new way. The system of racial profiling isn't just something he's read about. It's a reality he's living. The truth hits him like a cold gust of wind. He's not just fighting for respect, he's fighting for the right to exist without judgment. Lucas's voice trembles, but he doesn't back down. "My dad's a CIA agent," he says once more, this time with even more conviction, the words carrying the strength of his family's history and the pride of his identity. The tension lingers in the air, thick and uncomfortable, as Matthews stares at him. But Lucas doesn't look away. He stands tall, refusing to let the officer's bias define him. Can you relate to Lucas here? What would you do if you were in his shoes? Drop a comment below, and let's discuss the harsh realities of racial profiling in our society. This question encourages viewers to reflect on their own experiences with authority, bias, and the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. Officer Matthews walks away from Lucas, the boy's steady gaze still burned into his memory. His steps are heavy, his thoughts clouded with disbelief. The nagging question continues to circle in his mind. What if the kid was telling the truth? But Matthews pushes it aside. He's seen this before. Kids making up stories, trying to get out of trouble. He's dealt with enough to know that there's always a reason, always an excuse. Determined to prove Lucas wrong, Matthews decides to pay a visit to the boy's home. He's been on the job long enough to know where people like Lucas live. He doesn't think it's going to take long to find out if this CIA agent father actually exists. He mutters to himself as he walks down the street toward the address Lucas mentioned, his frustration growing with each step. The neighborhood is quiet, the same as when he first approached Lucas. But now, there's a feeling of tension in the air, the calm before a storm that Matthews has no idea is coming. He reaches the house, a modest, well-kept home, not what he expected. There's no grandiose gate, no luxury cars parked outside. Just a family home, the kind that anyone could live in. As he stands at the door, he doesn't realize that he's about to be confronted with the truth he's so desperately trying to ignore. He knocks once, then again, a little harder this time. There's a moment of silence before the door opens, and there he is, Lucas's father. The man before Matthews is tall, composed, his presence commanding without being threatening. He's dressed in a suit, not too flashy, but unmistakably professional. His face is calm, yet there's an air of authority about him that Matthews can't ignore. And then it hits him. Lucas's father is who he said he was, a high-ranking CIA agent. The moment stretches, thick with the realization of Matthews's mistake. "Can I help you?" Lucas's father asks, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of curiosity. Matthews stands there for a beat, uncertain how to proceed. He can't just walk away now. He's come this far, and there's a part of him that wants to prove the boy was lying. So he clears his throat, trying to steady his nerves, but the words come out with more hesitation than he expects. Your son said you were a CIA agent," Matthews says, his voice tinged with doubt, as if still trying to convince himself that Lucas must have made it all up. "I just wanted to verify that." Lucas's father steps aside, inviting Matthews in, his calmness only making Matthews feel more out of place. He steps into the house, trying to regain some semblance of control, but the atmosphere is different here. Warmer, more human than Matthews is used to. Lucas's father leads him to the living room, where photographs of the family line the walls, showcasing moments of happiness, love, and pride. "I'm glad to meet you, officer," Lucas's father says with a politeness that's both disarming and calculated. "But I'm guessing you didn't come here just to verify what my son told you." Matthews shifts uncomfortably, his hands finding their way into his pockets, eyes avoiding the gaze of the man sitting across from him. He's starting to realize just how out of place he feels here, like he's trespassing on something he doesn't fully understand. I stopped your son earlier," Matthews stammers. "He was walking alone, and I thought—" He falters, realizing how hollow his explanation sounds. His mind is racing, trying to find the words to justify the confrontation. Lucas's father leans forward slightly, his tone shifting, the calmness replaced by something sharper. "You thought what? That my son didn't belong here because of the color of his skin?" Matthews opens his mouth to protest, but no words come out. It's as if everything he's been trained to believe, everything that's been ingrained in him for years, is suddenly laid bare and under scrutiny. He feels his face flush with embarrassment, but he won't back down. "I just thought—" "You thought nothing." Lucas's father cuts him off, his voice firm now, steady, with an undeniable power. "You harassed my son because you assumed he didn't belong in this neighborhood. You saw a black boy walking alone, and instead of doing your job, you made assumptions based on his appearance." The words hit Matthews like a punch to the gut. His mind scrambles for a response, but there's nothing that can justify his actions. "You've crossed a line today," Lucas's father continues, his voice growing colder, sharper. "My son did nothing wrong, yet you harassed him because of the color of his skin. That will not be tolerated." Matthews opens his mouth, but no words come out. He tries to speak, but his mind is blank. The truth settles in, heavy and undeniable. He was wrong. He knew it, deep down, the moment Lucas's calm demeanor and his father's quiet confidence showed him the depths of his own mistakes. His bias, his prejudices. He spent years reinforcing them, and now, here they are, laid bare, impossible to ignore. Lucas's father stands up, his gaze unwavering. "You will report to your superior tomorrow," he says, his voice low but filled with authority, "and I will be there. I expect an apology for the way you treated my son, and you will have to answer for your actions." Matthews stands there, rooted to the spot, unable to move. His stomach twists with shame. He doesn't know what to say, or if there's anything he could say to make it right. His bias, his mistake, it's all out in the open now, and there's no way to hide from it. He can't take back what he's done, and that realization sinks deep. "Do better," Lucas's father says, his tone final, and with that he turns and walks away. Officer Matthews stands there in silence, feeling the weight of the moment, of his own actions. The door is open, but he doesn't move. What once felt like a simple encounter is now a defining moment in his career and his life, one that will change everything he thought he knew about himself. Lucas's father wastes no time. As soon as Officer Matthews walks away, and still processing the harsh reality of his actions, he picks up his phone and dials the precinct. His tone is calm but resolute. There's no hesitation in his voice, only the authority of a man who knows the weight of the situation. "Hello," he says, the words clipped and deliberate. "I need to speak with someone about an officer's behavior, Officer Matthews. He just harassed my son, and it needs to be addressed immediately." On the other end, the voice sounds surprised, but Lucas's father doesn't wait for an apology. He recounts the entire incident. How Officer Matthews approached Lucas, the tone of his questions, the escalation of suspicion and bias, and the eventual confrontation at his home. There's no sugarcoating. He's clear, direct, and unwavering. This is not the first time this officer's actions have been called into question. He continues, "I expect an official investigation, and I expect consequences." His voice hardens. This cannot stand. Within minutes, Lucas's father hangs up, and the weight of what's about to unfold begins to settle in. The precinct's response is swift. Within hours, Officer Matthews is placed on administrative leave pending an internal review. The announcement sends ripples through the department, but it's only the beginning. As the days pass, Matthews is subjected to a thorough investigation. His past actions, previously brushed under the rug, are now being unearthed one by one. His father, walking beside him, is deep in thought. He's proud of his son, proud of how Lucas handled himself, proud that he's raising a child who values justice. But there's also a somber undertone to the victory. This wasn't just a father protecting his son. It was a man confronting the deep-rooted issues that have affected generations. For Lucas's father, tonight was more than a personal triumph. It was a reminder that the fight for fairness, for the end of systemic prejudice, is far from over. As they continue their walk, Lucas's father reflects on the situation. Officer Matthews's downfall, as swift and just as it may have been, is merely one small instance in a much larger system of racial inequality. The actions of one officer, though significant, are only part of a much broader issue. While he's relieved to see Matthews face consequences, he knows the true change comes from a collective effort. It's not enough to punish individuals. It's about dismantling the biases that shape the way people perceive others, especially those of different races. The real work begins now, ensuring that people like Lucas won't have to face such prejudice in the future. Lucas, though just a young boy, has become a symbol of silent resistance. In the face of hostility, he didn't shrink away. Instead, he stood firm, telling the truth as he saw it. And in doing so, he set a process of change into motion. His calmness in the face of adversity reminds us all that power doesn't always come in the form of loud protests or public displays. It can come quietly, in the form of a single, resolute statement. "My dad's a CIA agent." These simple words, spoken with sincerity, were all it took to challenge the officer's assumptions. It's a reminder that even the smallest truth can hold the power to alter the course of events. As Lucas and his father near their home, they pass the street where the confrontation took place. The street seems ordinary now, but in that one moment, it was a battleground for a much larger struggle. The night feels quieter, more subdued, as if the events of the past few hours have left an indelible mark on the world around them. The camera pulls back, following them as they disappear into the distance, their figures gradually blending into the night. The neighborhood, once filled with a sense of peace, now seems a little less tranquil. There's a new awareness in the air, a recognition of the work that still needs to be done. But there's also a sense of hope, the kind of hope that comes from knowing that progress, though often slow, is possible when people refuse to remain silent. As the screen fades to black, a message lingers in the air. The story of Lucas and his father isn't just one of individual justice. It's a call to action. It's a reminder that racial profiling and unchecked biases aren't just abstract problems. They have real consequences. They affect real people. And the fight against them requires each and every one of us to speak out when we see injustice, to recognize that our truths, no matter how small they may seem, can make a difference. In the quiet moments after the credits roll, the audience is left with a question: how many more stories like this will it take before the world fully wakes up to the reality of prejudice? And what can we do, individually and collectively, to ensure that the next generation doesn't have to walk this same path? It's a question that lingers long after the screen fades, urging each of us to continue the work of challenging prejudice in all its forms. The story has ended, but the lesson is far from over.